Dan Ciuriak, Director and Principal of Ciuriak Consulting, joins us. Thank you for speaking with us on France 24.
A pleasure to be here.
When Donald Trump said he was going to tear up NAFTA, did you think that there'd be an agreement first with Mexico before Canada?
No, this is obviously a novel negotiating tactics, but it is tactics. Mr. Trump doesn't have trade promotion authority to negotiate two-way deals. He's got trade promotion authority to renegotiate NAFTA. So Canada has to come on board for this to become a deal within the U.S. legal framework. And the U.S. has put on the table a deal that I think Canada has to refuse and walk away from, given 3 days to accept a pat deal done between the United States and Mexico, which did not take into account Canada's red lines. I think is impossible for Canada to sign on to.
Remind us of those red lines.
So, for example, the most important thing that Canada wanted in the original free trade agreement with the United States back in '89 was to have a trade remedy laws not to apply. We didn't get that, but we did get the Chapter 19 mechanism, which provides for binational panel review of anti-dumping and countervailing duty actions. That's huge for us. MFN tariffs between Canada and the United States are very low, but anti-dumping and countervailing duties can be very high. So losing that is a very important loss for Canada. That's one thing. The government procurement offer that the United States has to be rejected. It's a ridiculous one, and it's bad for the U.S. because it would reduce competition in the U.S. as well for procurement. The rules of origin for autos are probably not a huge problem for Canada. We have similar concerns, I suppose, from the standpoint of view of wanting to preserve auto assembly and production in Canada, and this is an issue for Mexico, but overall, it does imply that the cost structure of the auto industry rises, makes it less competitive globally, and that simply tees up a future of more tariffs.
Explain that last point about the automobiles.
So if the auto production in North America is made uncompetitive because of onerous rules of origin, which are restrictive, they would impose higher costs on the industry. That coupled with the U.S.
Is this telling that the workers have to be paid at least $16 U.S. dollars an hour?
This is in Mexico, that's one thing, but also 75% North American content versus 62.5 before. The direction of change of these measures is to raise costs for industry. And coming on top of the tariffs on steel and aluminum, this is raising the cost structure for U.S. and Canadian and Mexican production, and that makes us vulnerable to imports from Europe, vulnerable to imports from Asia, and that then tees up another round of tariffs to protect the downstream industry, to protect the assembly industry in North America. So this is strategically a dangerous path to go down. It exposes the world to intensified trade wars.
Do we know any more, because there's been a lot of feuding over dairy products, do we know any more of where we stand right now in the negotiations?
We have no real idea. I mean, this is, of course, a major issue for Canada and for the United States. They've made it a major issue for the negotiations. Canada and the United States struck a deal for expanded dairy access for the U.S. In the Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations. According to estimates by the United States International Trade Commission, that amounted to almost $1 billion worth, or over $1 billion worth, additional U.S. exports to Canada. So Canada can simply re-up that deal in the NAFTA, and it may be somewhat painful for us in terms of domestic consolidation of dairy, but it is doable. It's not going to be, in my view, a deal breaker. If the Trump administration pushes for complete termination of the supply management, that would be a $30 billion or so hit to Canadian fiscal situation, and that Canada would have to walk away from that. We can't do that, simply put.
Would have to walk away from that. Dan Ciuriak, again, it brings us to the politics of all of this. Mexico's foreign minister, Luis Videgaray, telling Mexican television earlier that the three sides would be working for, just an update of the three-way deal, NAFTA, that already exists. However, let's listen to the U.S. Finance Secretary. He sounds less explicit on that point.
The president's objective is to have deals with Mexico and have a deal with Canada. And if we could do it as one deal, we'll do it as one deal. If we do it in two deals, we'll do it in two deals. This is a complicated agreement. There's lots of things in here that are all new. I would think that Canada would be very much on board with stronger intellectual property, stronger protections, modernizing the agreement. So I'm hopeful that the open issues with Canada can be resolved quickly.
What's your reaction to those words, Dan Ciuriak?
Well, in terms of whether it's one deal or two deals, again, the negotiating authority that the Trump administration has is for a combined deal. Now, Mr. Trump campaigned vigorously against NAFTA. He hates the deal, and he is intimating, even as we speak, that that NAFTA will be gone as a label at least. But in terms of whether he can actually do that, that's not the question. He might actually push for that, and the question would be whether there will be congressional pushback on it, because he doesn't have authority. But I suppose he could strike a deal with Mexico. If Canada cannot agree to the terms and walks away, he could say he's tearing up NAFTA. The U.S.-Mexico deal might apply to U.S.-Mexico trade. Canada and U.S. trade would continue to be governed by NAFTA because it requires legislative change. So it would be a very messy situation, and there's a lot of gamesmanship going on right now.
Why is he playing more hardball with Canada than Mexico? Does it have to do with the economy, or is it just that politically he really doesn't like Justin Trudeau?
That's a hard call. Canada-U.S. trade is extraordinarily well balanced. Mr. Trump has made a big issue of bilateral trade balances. There is no trade balance issue with Canada. There is a trade balance issue with Mexico and with other countries, but not Canada. It's a huge
so it is
relationship.
Political.
It has to be political in some sense, or alternatively, it is just negotiating tactics. That in the end, the U.S. doesn't have any truly major offensive objectives in Canada. There are the intellectual property measures, which, by the way, raise health costs both in the U.S. and in Canada. This is rent-seeking behavior that Mr. Trump is supporting, and it's not good for the U.S. economy either. But it is a negotiating objective. So, but at the end of the day, there's not much that is a problem. There's not much that's broken between Canada and the United States. And many U.S. states, so some 34, 35 U.S. states, count Canada as the largest trading partner. And they have got tremendous interest in not seeing that trade disrupted. So there's we have a lot of allies in the U.S. pressing for a non-disrupted deal.
So if you were whispering into Chrystia Freeland's ear, you've explained to us all the points on which she should walk away from the deal, but how should she handle herself in these discussions?
I think she has to stand up for Canada. I go back to the 1989 deal, and Simon Reisman was Canada's chief trade negotiator at that point. And at one point, he simply got up and walked away from the deal when the Americans were not forthcoming, and that got the Americans on board. I mean, you have to this is hardball negotiation, and you have to be prepared to play hardball. And Canada is not without assets in this regard. As I said, there is a lot of U.S. interest in our market, huge interest in our market. We have a balanced trade relationship, there aren't any problems. And the measures that which are novel are cost increasing, uncertainty increasing, and rent seeking, which is damaging for both economies. So we can make that point with the American, with Congress and with the American stakeholders. There will be pushback against anything disastrous happening between Canada and the U.S.
Dan Ciuriak, many thanks for joining us from Ottawa.
My pleasure.